The champagne glass slipped from Vanessa's trembling fingers, shattering across the Italian marble floor of the grand ballroom. 200 guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos turned to stare as her husband, billionaire tech mogul Johnson Matthews, stood before her with a look of pure contempt etched across his handsome face. "This is exactly why I told you to stay home," Johnson hissed, loud enough for the surrounding circle of Philadelphia's elite to hear every word. "You don't belong in spaces like this, Vanessa. You're embarrassing yourself, and worse, you're embarrassing me." Vanessa stood frozen, her emerald dress now splattered with champagne, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. She had only been trying to join a conversation about community development initiatives, something she actually knew about from her years running a nonprofit in West Philadelphia. But Johnson had appeared beside her like a thundercloud, his jaw tight, his eyes cold, and within seconds he had reduced her to this: a spectacle for the city's wealthiest to gossip about over their caviar and imported wine. The orchestra had stopped playing, the room held its collective breath, and Vanessa felt something inside her chest crack open, something that had been breaking slowly for the past 3 years of their 5-year marriage, ever since Johnson's software company went public and transformed them from a happy middle-class couple into inhabitants of a world she never wanted to enter. "I was just talking about affordable housing," Vanessa said quietly, hating how small her voice sounded. "Mr. Cardwell asked me about the work we do at the Community Empowerment Center, and I was explaining—" "Nobody cares about your little charity project," Johnson interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. "Richard Cardwell is one of the most powerful real estate developers on the East Coast. He was being polite, Vanessa. He doesn't actually want to hear about your food banks and your job training programs. These people deal in millions, in transforming entire city blocks, in real power. Your small-time operation is, frankly, beneath the level of conversation at an event like this." Richard Cardwell, a distinguished black man in his 60s with silver threading through his close-cropped hair, shifted uncomfortably nearby. "Actually, Johnson, I was quite interested in what your wife was saying. The intersection of affordable housing and community services is something I've been wanting to explore more thoughtfully in my developments." Mrs. Matthews was providing valuable insight. Johnson's smile never wavered, but Vanessa saw his hand clench into a fist at his side. He hated being contradicted, especially in public, especially by someone he was trying to impress. "That's very generous of you, Richard, but I think we both know there's a difference between interest and actual business potential. Vanessa means well, she always has, but she doesn't quite grasp the realities of high-level development." The condescension in his tone made Vanessa's cheeks burn. She had a master's degree in social work from Temple University. She had built the Community Empowerment Center from a small volunteer operation run out of a church basement into an organization that served over 3,000 families a year. She had secured grants, managed budgets, built partnerships with local businesses and universities. She wasn't some naive volunteer handing out sandwiches, no matter how Johnson tried to frame it. But she didn't say any of that because she had learned over the past 3 years that defending herself only made things worse. Johnson would wait until they got home, until they were alone in their cold penthouse overlooking the Schuylkill River, and then he would unleash the full force of his anger, telling her she had made him look weak, that she had undermined his authority, that she clearly didn't understand how much he had sacrificed to build their life. Their life. As if she had asked for any of it. As if she hadn't been happier in their small apartment in University City, when Johnson was still a programmer with big dreams and a kind heart. When they would cook dinner together and talk for hours about using technology to solve social problems. When he looked at her like she was the most brilliant person he had ever met. That Johnson had disappeared somewhere along the way, replaced by this stranger who wore expensive suits and measured his worth in stock options and Shijiao connections, who had moved her into a showcase penthouse and then slowly, methodically, made her feel like she didn't deserve to be there. "Why don't you go check on the catering?" Johnson said, his tone making it clear it wasn't a suggestion. "I believe there was some confusion about the dessert service. Make yourself useful." Vanessa felt the dismissal like a physical blow. Around them, conversations were slowly resuming, but she could feel the sideways glances, the whispered comments, the mixture of pity and schadenfreude that came from watching someone be publicly diminished. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, to be anywhere but here. Instead, she lifted her chin, met Johnson's cold gaze, and said with as much dignity as she could muster, "Of course." She turned and walked toward the kitchen corridor, her heels clicking against the marble, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She refused to cry. Not here, not where people could see. She had learned that much at least. Show nothing, feel nothing, survive. Behind her she heard Johnson's laugh, warm and charming as he resumed his conversation with Richard Cardwell. As if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just humiliated his wife in front of 200 people. The sound of it made her stomach turn. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're watching this story unfold and finding yourself drawn into Vanessa's world, do me a favor. Look down at that subscribe button and hit it. You know what's interesting? Most of the people watching these stories, good people like you who appreciate a tale of justice and redemption, haven't subscribed yet. But this is more than just a channel. This is a community of folks who believe in karma, in second chances, in the power of truth to win out over cruelty. So click that subscribe button, hit the like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Georgia? New York? Manchester? Netherlands? I want to know where my community is, because your engagement helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. Now let's get back to Vanessa, because what's about to happen is going to change everything. Vanessa made it to the ladies' room before the tears came, locking herself in the spacious lounge area with its velvet settees and gold fixtures. She braced her hands against the marble counter and stared at her reflection, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. When had she become so hollowed out? When had she started wearing this mask of perfect composure while dying inside? The door opened, and Vanessa quickly dabbed at her eyes, expecting one of the society wives who would smile with false sympathy while mentally cataloging every detail to share later. Instead, an older woman entered, elegant in a simple navy dress that somehow outclassed every designer gown at the party through sheer dignity alone. She had rich brown skin, silver hair swept up in a classic style, and eyes that saw everything. "Child," the woman said softly, and something in her voice made Vanessa's carefully constructed composure crumble completely. "I'm fine," Vanessa managed, but her voice broke on the words. "No, you're not." The woman moved closer, pulling tissues from her clutch and handing them over. "And you don't have to be. What that man did out there was cruel and unnecessary, and you have every right to your feelings about it." Vanessa took the tissues, wiping carefully at her eyes, trying not to ruin her makeup completely. "You saw?" "Everyone saw, honey. That was the point, wasn't it? To put you in your place in front of an audience." The woman's voice was gentle but unflinching. "I've seen men like your husband before. They build their empires and forget that the people who love them when they were nothing are the most valuable thing they'll ever have." "He wasn't always like this," Vanessa heard herself say. "When we met, Johnson was different. He was kind. He cared about making a difference, not just making money. He believed in the work I was doing. He believed in me." "People change when they get a taste of power," the woman said. "Some grow into better versions of themselves. Others shrink into smaller, meaner souls despite all their wealth and influence. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Vanessa looked up at this stranger who spoke with such certainty, such clarity. "What can I do? Johnson controls everything. The penthouse is his, the money is his, even my car is registered in his name. He made me quit my job at the center 2 years ago, said it wasn't appropriate for his wife to be working. I have nothing of my own anymore." "You have yourself," the woman said firmly. "You have your education, your experience, your heart for service. Those things don't belong to him, no matter how much he's convinced you otherwise. And you have more power than you think, child. You just have to remember how to use it." Before Vanessa could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Johnson. "Where are you? Stop hiding and get back out here. We need to do the thank you speech in 10 minutes. The woman glanced at the phone and shook her head. "Treats you like an employee he's disappointed in, doesn't he? Not like a partner. Not like someone he loves." The word love hung in the air between them, and Vanessa realized with a jolt that she couldn't remember the last time Johnson had told her he loved her. Months? A year? When had those words disappeared from their vocabulary, replaced by criticism and commands? "I should go," Vanessa said, straightening her dress, checking her reflection one more time. The woman who looked back at her had fixed her makeup, smoothed her hair, restored the mask. But something in her eyes had changed, some small spark of defiance that hadn't been there before. "Before you do," the woman said, pressing a business card into Vanessa's hand. "My name is Dorothy Chen. I run a foundation that supports women in transition, women who need resources and support to reclaim their independence. If you ever decide you're done being treated like you're less than you are, you call me, day or night." Vanessa looked down at the card, then back at Dorothy's kind, knowing face. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Dorothy said. "I know you've been running the Community Empowerment Center and doing remarkable work with limited resources. I know you have a gift for connecting with people and understanding what communities actually need. And I know that you deserve so much better than a man who tears you down to make himself feel powerful. So you keep that card, and when you're ready, you use it." Vanessa slipped the card into her clutch, her heart hammering. "Thank you." She returned to the ballroom with her head high, finding Johnson near the small stage where the orchestra had been playing. He looked her over critically, his lip curling slightly at her champagne-stained dress, but he didn't comment. Instead, he took her elbow in a grip just tight enough to hurt and guided her toward the microphone. "Smile," he muttered, "and for God's sake, let me do all the talking." They stood together on the stage, the perfect picture of a successful couple. Johnson launched into a polished speech about the importance of philanthropy, about giving back to the community, about how blessed they were to be able to make a difference. The irony wasn't lost on Vanessa. Here he was, talking about community support and empowerment, the very things he had mocked her for caring about just 30 minutes earlier. She smiled. She nodded at the appropriate moments. She played her part, but something had shifted. Dorothy Chen's words echoed in her mind. "You have more power than you think." And for the first time in 3 years, Vanessa allowed herself to wonder if that might actually be true. The party wound down around 11. Guests began filtering out, air kissing and promising to do lunch, their drivers pulling up in a parade of luxury vehicles. Johnson worked the room like the practiced politician he'd become, shaking hands and making connections, while Vanessa stood slightly behind him, ornamental and silent. Richard Cardwell approached them as they were preparing to leave. "Johnson, excellent event as always. And Mrs. Matthews?" He turned to Vanessa with genuine warmth. "I meant what I said earlier. I'd very much like to continue our conversation about integrating community services into residential development. Perhaps you could come by my office next week? I'm serious about exploring this." Before Vanessa could respond, Johnson jumped in smoothly. "That's very kind of you, Richard, but Vanessa's schedule is quite full. Perhaps I could have my assistant set up a meeting to discuss the broad strokes, and we could see if there's any alignment with Johnson Enterprises' philanthropic initiatives." "With respect, Johnson, I was asking your wife, not you," Richard said, his tone polite but firm. "Mrs. Matthews clearly has expertise in this area that I'd like to learn from directly. So, Vanessa, what do you say? Tuesday afternoon? 2 o'clock? Vanessa felt Johnson's hand tighten on her arm, a warning. She knew what he expected her to say. She knew the script. "Thank you so much, but I'll have to check my schedule. Let me have Johnson's office reach out. Deflect, defer, disappear." Instead, she heard herself say, "Tuesday at 2 works perfectly for me. Thank you, Mr. Cardwell. I'll have my assistant send over some preliminary information about our current programs." She didn't have an assistant. She barely had access to her own email anymore, since Johnson had insisted she use a shared account that he monitored. But something about Dorothy Chen's card burning a hole in her clutch, about Richard Cardwell treating her like a professional instead of an embarrassment, about the look on Johnson's face, a mixture of shock and rage barely contained behind his smile, made her feel reckless and alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. "Wonderful," Richard said, shaking her hand. "I look forward to it." The ride home in Johnson's Mercedes was silent and ice cold. He didn't speak, didn't look at her, just drove with his jaw clenched and his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Vanessa knew this mood, knew what was coming, and part of her didn't even care anymore. She was so tired of being afraid, so exhausted from walking on eggshells, from making herself smaller and quieter, and less just to avoid his anger. They rode the private elevator up to the penthouse, the silence stretching between them like a chasm. The moment the door closed behind them, Johnson exploded. What the hell was that? He threw his keys across the room, where they clattered against the floor-to-ceiling windows. You accepted a meeting without consulting me? You promised to have your assistant send information when you don't even have an assistant? Are you trying to make me look like I can't control my own wife? I'm not something to be controlled, Vanessa said quietly, but her hands were shaking as she set down her clutch. Oh, really? Johnson laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. Let me tell you something, Vanessa. Everything you have, everything you are in this city exists because of me. Your little charity work? I funded it. This penthouse? Mine. Your car, your clothes, your credit cards? All mine. You think Richard Cardwell wants to meet with you because you're some kind of expert? He's being polite because you're my wife, because he doesn't want to offend me. Without me, you're just another social worker from West Philly with a degree from a state school. Each word landed like a punch, designed to hurt, to diminish, to put her back in what he clearly saw as her place. And for 3 years, it had worked. For 3 years, Vanessa had absorbed his contempt and convinced herself she deserved it, that she wasn't smart enough or sophisticated enough or worthy enough for the life he had built. But tonight, something was different. Maybe it was the champagne still staining her dress. Maybe it was Dorothy Chen's kindness or Richard Cardwell's respect. Maybe it was just that she had finally reached her limit, the point where survival meant something different than it had before. You're right, Vanessa said, and watched Johnson's expression shift to satisfaction, thinking he'd won. You did build all of this. This beautiful, cold, empty showcase where we live like strangers, where you treat me like an embarrassing accessory you're stuck with, where I've spent 3 years disappearing a little more every day. You built this, Johnson, but I built something too. Your little nonprofit? Johnson scoffed. Please. No, Vanessa said. I built a life before you. I built a career, a sense of purpose, relationships with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could do for them. And somewhere along the way, I let you convince me that none of that mattered, that I didn't matter except as an extension of you. But I'm done believing that lie. Johnson stared at her, and for a moment she saw genuine surprise flash across his face before it hardened back into anger. You're done? You don't get to be done, Vanessa. You signed a prenup, remember? You walk away from this marriage, you leave with nothing. No money, no property, nothing. You'll go crawling back to that sad little life you had before me, and you'll spend the rest of your days wondering why you threw away the best thing that ever happened to you. Maybe I will, Vanessa said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. But at least I'll have my dignity. At least I won't have to see that look in your eyes anymore. That contempt, like you can barely stand the sight of me. At least I won't have to pretend that this is love, or anything close to it. For a long moment they stood facing each other across the expanse of their designer living room, years of resentment and hurt hanging heavy in the air between them. Then Johnson's phone rang, shattering the tension. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted, becoming calculating. We're not done with this conversation, he said coldly, but I have a conference call with the Singapore investors that I can't miss. When I'm finished, we're going to discuss exactly what your role in this marriage is going to be moving forward. And Vanessa, you're going to call Richard Cardwell's office tomorrow and cancel that meeting. Are we clear? He didn't wait for an answer, just walked into his home office and shut the door, leaving Vanessa standing alone in the dim living room, her reflection ghostly in the floor, to ceiling windows that looked out over the Philadelphia skyline. She walked to the window and pressed her palm against the cold glass. Somewhere out there was the West Philadelphia neighborhood where she had grown up, where her parents still lived in the same row house they'd bought 40 years ago, where her sister Keisha was probably putting her kids to bed, and living a life that was modest and real and full of actual love. Somewhere out there was the Community Empowerment Center, probably dark now, but ready to open tomorrow morning to serve the people who needed it. Somewhere out there was a world where she had mattered, where she had been valued, where she had been happy. Vanessa pulled Dorothy Chen's card from her clutch and stared at it for a long time. Then she pulled out her phone, the one Johnson didn't monitor because he didn't think she had anyone worth talking to, and she sent a text to her sister. "Can I come stay with you for a few days?" The response came back almost immediately. "Always." "What happened?" Vanessa typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on the truth. "I think I'm finally ready to leave him." She sent the text. Then she stood there in the darkness, watching the city lights blur through her tears, and waited for Johnson to finish his call so she could tell him she was leaving. Except she never got the chance, because at that exact moment, the penthouse door opened and a woman walked in, her silver hair catching the light, her navy dress from the party unmistakable. Dorothy Chen stood in the entryway, but there was something different about the way she carried herself now, something that commanded attention and respect. "Hello, Vanessa," she said softly. Vanessa spun around, confusion flooding through her. "Dorothy, how did you get in here? The doorman, the security? You need a key for the private elevator." "I have a key," Dorothy said simply. She walked further into the penthouse, her eyes sweeping over the expensive furniture, the original artwork, the designer everything, and her expression was unreadable. "I've always had a key. This is my building after all. I own it. Bought it as an investment property about 15 years ago." The words didn't make sense at first. Vanessa shook her head, trying to understand. "Your building? But Johnson said he bought this penthouse that technically he leases it from my investment company," Dorothy said. "Has for the past 3 years. He got a very good rate, actually, because the previous tenant moved out suddenly and I needed someone reliable. Johnson presented very well in his application. Successful tech entrepreneur, excellent credit, strong references. Of course, that was before I knew what kind of man he really was." "I don't understand," Vanessa said, though pieces were starting to click together in her mind, pieces that didn't quite fit the picture Johnson had painted. "At the party, you said you run a foundation. You gave me your card like you were offering help. But if you own this building, if you're Johnson's landlord—" "I'm a lot of things," Dorothy said gently. "I do run a foundation, several actually. I'm also a real estate investor, a retired professor of business ethics from Wharton, and a mother who raised 4 children on her own after my husband died. I built my wealth slowly, carefully through education and smart investments and a lot of hard work. I don't parade it around. I don't need everyone to know my net worth. But I use what I have to help people, especially women who find themselves in difficult situations." Vanessa sank down onto the leather couch, her legs suddenly unsteady. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've been watching you for 3 years now, Vanessa. I make it a point to know my tenants, to understand who's living in my properties, and what I've seen has troubled me deeply. I've watched you go from a vibrant woman who ran a successful nonprofit to someone who barely leaves the apartment except when Johnson requires your presence at his events. I've heard the arguments through the walls, heard the way he speaks to you. My night manager has told me about the times you've come home alone in tears, about the way Johnson treats the building staff like they're beneath him. You've been watching us," Vanessa said, feeling exposed and protected all at once. "I've been paying attention," Dorothy corrected. "There's a difference. And tonight, at that party, when I saw what he did to you, how he humiliated you in front of all those people, I decided it was time to stop watching and start acting." "But how did you even know to be at that party?" Dorothy smiled slightly. "Richard Cardwell is my son-in-law, married to my daughter Patricia for 28 years now. He told me about Johnson's charity gala, told me he was thinking about attending because Johnson had been courting him for some business deal. I suggested Richard and Patricia both go, and that I tag along. I wanted to see for myself what kind of man your husband really was." The revelations kept coming, each one shifting Vanessa's understanding of the evening. "Richard is your son-in-law? But he seemed genuinely interested in my work, in the Community Empowerment Center." "He is genuinely interested," Dorothy assured her. "Richard is one of the good ones. believes strongly in responsible development and community integration. Patricia made sure of that before she agreed to marry him. When I told him a little about your background, about the work you were doing before Johnson made you quit, Richard was eager to talk with you. Everything he said tonight, he meant. Vanessa felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. The world Johnson had constructed, where he was the source of all power and influence, where she existed only through his permission, was revealing itself to be built on sand. Why are you doing this? Why go to all this trouble for someone you don't even know? Dorothy sat down beside her, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of lived experience. Because 30 years ago, I was you. I was married to a man who made good money, who provided well, and who made me feel worthless every single day. He didn't hit me, but he might as well have with the words he used. And I stayed because I had 4 children and no job, and I'd been out of the workforce for years. I stayed because I was terrified of being poor, of failing, of proving him right when he said I was nothing without him. What changed? Vanessa whispered. He died suddenly. Heart attack at 52. And you know what I felt? Relief, not grief, not loss. Relief. And I swore to myself, standing at his funeral with my 4 children, that I would never let another woman stay trapped the way I had been. I went back to school, got my MBA, started investing in real estate. I built a life, a good life, on my own terms. And I've spent the last 25 years using my resources to help other women do the same. Vanessa felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I don't have children. I don't even have that excuse for staying. I'm just afraid. Fear is a perfectly good reason, Dorothy said firmly. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Leaving takes courage, and you get to decide when and how and if you're ready. But I want you to know that you have options, Vanessa. You have more power than Johnson wants you to believe. From his office, they could hear Johnson's voice rising, animated in conversation with his Singapore investors. He laughed at something, that charismatic sound that had once made Vanessa's heart race and now just made her feel cold. What kind of options? Vanessa asked. Dorothy pulled a folder from her large purse and laid it on the coffee table. This is information about the foundation I mentioned, including resources for housing, legal services, job placement, and financial support for women in transition. This, she placed another document on top, is a copy of Johnson's lease agreement for this penthouse. He has 6 months remaining, and the lease is very clear that it's non-transferable and requires both parties' signatures for renewal. Both parties? Vanessa frowned. But I never signed a lease. Exactly. Johnson forged your signature on the renewal 3 months ago. I have the original document, and I had a handwriting expert compare it to your actual signature from other documents. It's fraud, Vanessa. Actionable fraud. Vanessa stared at the papers, her mind reeling. You're saying he broke the law? That I could... I'm saying you have leverage if you need it, Dorothy said carefully. I'm not telling you what to do, but if you decide to leave, if you decide you're done being treated this way, you have more options than just walking away with nothing. Johnson wants you to believe he has all the power, that he controls everything. But he's been living in my building, forging signatures and probably doing a dozen other things that wouldn't stand up to legal scrutiny. Men like him always do. They get arrogant, sloppy, convinced they're untouchable. Vanessa picked up the lease document, her hands shaking. Why are you really doing this? Please, I need to understand. Dorothy took Vanessa's hand, her grip warm and steady. Because I see myself in you, child. Because you remind me of the woman I was, terrified and trapped and convinced she deserved it. Because I have resources now and influence, and I'll be damned if I don't use them to make a difference. And because tonight, when I watched your husband humiliate you, I saw something in your eyes that gave me hope. What did you see? A spark, Dorothy said simply. A flash of anger, of defiance, of fight. It's still there, Vanessa. You haven't lost it completely, and that tells me you're ready, even if you don't know it yet. Before Vanessa could respond, Johnson's office door opened, and he emerged, his expression thunderous. He froze when he saw Dorothy sitting on his couch, his eyes narrowing with suspicion and confusion. Who the hell are you, and how did you get into my home? He demanded. Dorothy stood slowly, drawing herself up to her full height, and when she spoke, her voice carried absolute authority. Your home? Interesting choice of words, Mr. Matthews. This is my building, and therefore my penthouse that you've been leasing for the past 3 years. My name is Dorothy Chen, and I'm your landlord. Johnson's face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, confusion, and then a calculating wariness. Mrs. Chen, of course, I apologize, I didn't recognize you. It's late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. How can I help you? You can start by explaining why you forged your wife's signature on your lease renewal, Dorothy said calmly, and watched Johnson's face pale. To his credit, he recovered quickly, that smooth mask of confidence sliding back into place. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Vanessa and I handle our administrative tasks jointly. If there was any irregularity with the paperwork, I assure you it was unintentional. Was it unintentional when you humiliated her in front of 200 people tonight? Dorothy asked. When you told her she didn't belong in spaces with successful people, that her work was beneath notice, that she was an embarrassment to you? Johnson's jaw tightened. That was a private conversation between my wife and myself. I don't appreciate you eavesdropping or interfering in my marriage. Whatever issues Vanessa has been sharing with you— Vanessa hasn't shared anything, Dorothy interrupted. I have eyes and ears, Mr. Matthews. I pay attention to what happens in my properties. And what I've observed over the past 3 years is a pattern of emotional abuse that I find deeply troubling. Emotional abuse? Johnson laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what she told you? Let me guess. She's been playing the victim, making me out to be some kind of monster? That's rich. I've given Vanessa everything: a beautiful home, financial security, access to a life she could never have achieved on her own. And this is how she repays me? By crying to my landlord about how mistreated she is? I didn't tell her anything, Vanessa found her voice, standing up to face Johnson. She saw for herself tonight. Everyone did. Johnson turned on her, his expression venomous. Of course you would side with some stranger over your own husband. Do you have any idea how pathetic that makes you look? How desperate? I'd say recognizing someone who's offering genuine kindness versus someone who's systematically destroying her self-worth shows pretty good judgment, actually, Dorothy said coolly. Now, Mr. Matthews, here's how this is going to work. Your lease expires in 6 months. I will not be renewing it, forged signature or otherwise. You have until then to find alternative accommodations. Johnson's face flushed with anger. You can't do that. I have a legal contract, which you violated by committing fraud, Dorothy reminded him. I could have you out in 30 days if I chose to pursue this legally. 6 months is generous. I'd suggest you take it. This is because of her, isn't it? Johnson gestured at Vanessa with barely controlled rage. She's been feeding you lies, trying to turn you against me. Fine. You want to kick me out of this overpriced box? Go ahead. I'll find something better, something actually worthy of my status. But understand this, Mrs. Chen. My lawyers will be in touch. You can't just terminate a lease because you've decided you don't like someone. Actually, I can, Dorothy said pleasantly. It's right there in Section 14 of your contract. The landlord reserves the right to terminate for cause, including but not limited to illegal activity, fraud, or behavior that creates a hostile environment for other residents or staff. The building manager has documented 17 complaints from staff about your behavior over the past 2 years. The couple in the unit below yours has filed 3 noise complaints about your arguments. And now we have evidence of signature fraud. So yes, Mr. Matthews, I absolutely can terminate this lease. The only question is whether you'd like to leave quietly in 6 months or fight me and leave within 30 days. Your choice. Johnson looked between Dorothy and Vanessa, his face twisted with fury and something that might have been fear. He was a man used to having control, used to winning, and the ground was shifting beneath him in ways he clearly hadn't anticipated. Vanessa, he said, his tone shifting to something that might have passed for conciliatory, if not for the anger still simmering in his eyes. Come on, baby, this is getting out of hand. Mrs. Chen doesn't understand our relationship. Let's go to our room and talk about this privately. Work this out between us, like we always do. Like we always do, Vanessa repeated softly. You mean where you yell at me until I apologize for existing? Where you make me feel small and stupid and worthless until I promise to be better, to try harder, to disappear more completely into the background of your life? Don't be dramatic, Johnson snapped, his attempt at gentleness evaporating instantly. I've never laid a hand on you. No, you just used words instead, Vanessa said, and she was surprised by how steady her voice was, how clear. You just systematically destroyed my confidence, isolated me from my friends and family, made me quit my job, convinced me that I was nothing without you. That's not love, Johnson. That's control. And I'm done being controlled. Johnson's expression turned cold and calculating. Fine. You want to leave? Leave. But you signed a prenup, remember? A very thorough prenup that my lawyers made sure was airtight. You walk out that door, you get nothing. No money, no property, nothing. You'll be back to living in some studio apartment in a bad neighborhood, working at your little charity for poverty wages, wondering why you threw away the best thing that ever happened to you. If being with you is the best thing that ever happened to me, Vanessa said quietly, then I've had a very sad life. But I don't believe that anymore. I don't believe I need you to have value or purpose or a future. I don't believe any of the lies you've been telling me for 3 years. You don't believe? Johnson's laugh was harsh and mocking. Belief doesn't pay bills, Vanessa. Reality does. And the reality is that without me, you're nobody. You're nothing. That's where you're wrong, Dorothy interjected. Vanessa has been running one of the most effective community empowerment organizations in Philadelphia on a shoestring budget. She has a master's degree in social work, extensive experience in nonprofit management, and a proven track record of securing grants and building community partnerships. Any organization would be lucky to have her. In fact, I know of at least 3 foundations that would be very interested in bringing her on board as a program director, with a salary significantly higher than what you probably think she's worth. Johnson stared at Dorothy with barely concealed hatred. You've got this all planned out, don't you? Swoop in, play the savior, convince my wife to leave me, probably offer her some pity job at one of your bleeding heart charities. What's in it for you? Are you lonely? Need a project to make yourself feel important? What's in it for me, Dorothy said, her voice steel wrapped in silk, is the satisfaction of helping a talented woman escape a toxic situation and reclaim her life. What's in it for me is knowing that I used my resources to make a difference for someone who deserves so much better than she's been receiving. What's in it for me is watching a small, cruel man face consequences for the first time in his privileged life. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Johnson's hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment Vanessa saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. But he mastered himself, that perfect control sliding back into place. You're making a huge mistake, he said, his voice tight. Both of you. Vanessa, you think leaving me is going to make you happy? You're going to find out very quickly that the real world is harsh and unforgiving. And Mrs. Chen, you think you can just waltz in here and destroy my life without consequences? I have lawyers, I have money, I have connections. This isn't over. No, it's probably not, Dorothy agreed calmly. But here's what is over. Your lease on this penthouse. Your ability to use intimidation and control to keep your wife trapped. Your illusion that you're untouchable. Now, I'm going to give you a choice, Mr. Matthews. You can accept the 6-month notice on your lease and part ways civilly. Or you can fight me, and I will make it my personal mission to ensure that every business contact you have knows exactly what kind of man you are. Richard Cardwell, for instance, would be very interested to hear how you treat your wife. He's mentioned wanting to discuss potential partnerships with Johnson Enterprises. I wonder how that conversation might change if he knew the full picture. Johnson's face went pale. Richard Cardwell represented exactly the kind of connection he'd been cultivating, the old money Philadelphia establishment that still held enormous influence. Losing that potential partnership would hurt, and they all knew it. This is blackmail, Johnson said. No, it's a business proposition, Dorothy corrected. You accept your lease termination gracefully. You negotiate a fair separation agreement with Vanessa that doesn't leave her destitute, And in exchange, I keep my observations about your character to myself. Seems equitable to me. Vanessa watched the calculation happening behind Johnson's eyes. He was weighing his options, trying to find an angle, a way to win. But Dorothy had outmaneuvered him, and slowly, reluctantly, he seemed to realize it. Fine, he bit out. 6 months. But I want Vanessa out tonight. She can go stay with her family or whatever friends she thinks she has left. This is my home for the next 6 months, and I don't want her here. That's acceptable, Dorothy said before Vanessa could respond. In fact, I think that's an excellent idea. Vanessa, why don't you pack a bag? Take your time. Mr. Matthews and I can discuss the details of his lease termination while you gather your things. Vanessa looked between them, feeling like she was in a dream. Like any moment she might wake up and find herself still trapped in this beautiful, terrible penthouse with no way out. But Dorothy's steady gaze anchored her, reminded her that this was real, that she was actually leaving. Okay, Vanessa heard herself say. I'll pack. She walked toward the master bedroom, Johnson's eyes burning into her back the entire way. Her hands shook as she pulled a suitcase from the closet, as she began gathering clothes and toiletries and the few personal items that still felt like hers. Everything else, all the designer clothes and expensive jewelry that Johnson had bought her, she left behind. She didn't want anything that came from him, anything that tied her to this life. She was almost finished packing when her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Keisha. Your room is ready. We love you. Come home. Come home. The words made Vanessa's throat tighten with emotion. When had this penthouse stopped feeling like home? When had she started thinking of her parents' modest row house in Mount Airy as the place she wanted to be? She wheeled her suitcase back into the living room to find Dorothy and Johnson standing on opposite sides of the space, the tension between them palpable. Johnson looked at her bag and his lip curled. That's all you're taking? After everything I've given you? I only want what's actually mine, Vanessa said quietly. Everything else belongs to the life you built, not to me. How noble, Johnson sneered. How convenient to take the moral high ground when you're walking away from your legal obligations. That prenup still stands, Vanessa. This little dramatic exit doesn't change that. We'll see, Dorothy said mildly. Prenuptial agreements can be challenged on various grounds, including coercion, fraud, and unconscionability. If Vanessa decides to pursue that route, I know several excellent family law attorneys who work on contingency. But that's a conversation for another day. Right now, I believe it's time for her to go. Dorothy held out her hand to Vanessa. Come on, dear. My car is downstairs. I'll make sure you get to your sister's house safely. Vanessa took Dorothy's hand, feeling the warmth and strength in it, the promise of support and possibility. She looked at Johnson one last time, at the man she had married 5 years ago in a small ceremony, filled with hope and love, and tried to find some trace of that person in the cold stranger before her. I really did love you once, she said softly. I hope you remember that, when you're alone here in your beautiful, empty penthouse. I hope you remember that someone actually loved you before you decided that power was more important than people. Johnson said nothing, just stood there with his jaw clenched and his hands fisted at his sides, watching as his wife walked out of his life. The elevator ride down felt like descending from one world into another. Dorothy stood beside Vanessa in companionable silence, not pushing, just present. When they reached the lobby, the night doorman nodded respectfully to Dorothy, confirming her status as someone who held real power in this building. Outside, Dorothy's car was waiting, a practical Mercedes sedan that spoke of wealth without shouting it. As they pulled away from the building, Vanessa looked up at the penthouse windows, 50 floors above the street, and felt something inside her chest loosen for the first time in years. How are you feeling? Dorothy asked gently. Terrified, Vanessa admitted. And lighter. Is that strange? Not at all. Fear and relief often come together when we make big changes. Dorothy navigated through the empty Philadelphia streets with practiced ease. Would you like to talk about what happens next, or would you prefer silence? I think I need to talk, Vanessa said, because I have no idea what I'm doing. I meant what I said about the prenup. Johnson's lawyers were very thorough. I signed away any claim to his assets, his business, even this building before I knew you owned it. I have about $8,000 in a personal bank account that I managed to keep separate. And that's it. I don't even have a job anymore because he made me quit the Community Empowerment Center. First of all, $8,000 is more than many women have when they leave, Dorothy said. Don't minimize that. It's a safety net. Second, the Community Empowerment Center would take you back in a heartbeat. I did some research. They've had 3 different program directors since you left, and none of them have been able to replicate what you built. The current board president is a woman named Sharon Mitchell. She's been hoping you'd come back for 2 years. Vanessa felt tears prickling her eyes again. How do you know all this? I told you I pay attention. When I realized what was happening with you and Johnson, I started asking questions, making inquiries. I wanted to understand who you were beyond the woman I saw disappearing into that penthouse. And what I found was impressive, Vanessa. You built something meaningful, something that made a real difference in people's lives. Johnson tried to erase that, tried to make you think it didn't matter. But it did. It does. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the city lights reflecting off the wet streets. It had started to drizzle, a soft November rain that made everything look softer, more forgiving. Can I ask you something? Vanessa said finally. Anything. At the party, before you revealed who you were, you said people change when they get power, that some grow into better versions of themselves and others shrink into smaller, meaner souls. Do you think Johnson was always like this? Or did the money change him? Dorothy considered the question carefully. I think the money revealed who he already was. Power doesn't create character, it exposes it. When Johnson was struggling, when he needed you, he had to be kind. He had to be considerate. But once he didn't need you anymore, once he had the power to control instead of collaborate, his true nature showed itself. That's not your fault, Vanessa. You didn't fail him. He failed you and himself. They pulled up in front of a row house in Mount Airy, lights glowing warmly in the windows. Vanessa could see shapes moving inside, her family waiting up for her despite the late hour. The door opened before she could even unbuckle her seatbelt, and her sister Keisha came running out, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf, wearing pajama pants and one of their father's old sweatshirts. You came, Keisha said, pulling Vanessa into a fierce hug the moment she stepped out of the car. I was so worried you'd change your mind. I almost did, Vanessa admitted, about 100 times, but I had help. She turned to introduce Dorothy, but the older woman was already getting out of the car, extending her hand to Keisha with a warm smile. You must be the sister. I'm Dorothy Chen. I gave Vanessa a little push in the right direction tonight. A little push? Vanessa laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. You upended my entire life in the space of 2 hours. Sometimes that's exactly what a life needs, Dorothy said. A good upending. Now, before I go, I want to give you this. She handed Vanessa another business card, different from the first one. This is my personal cell phone, not just the foundation number. You call me if you need anything, day or night. Legal help, job references, someone to talk to, whatever. You don't have to do this alone. Why are you being so kind to me? Vanessa asked, the question that had been hovering in her mind all evening, finally breaking free. You don't even know me. Dorothy took Vanessa's hands in hers, her grip warm and firm. I know you well enough, and I told you I see myself in you. 30 years ago, I didn't have anyone to help me when I finally got free. I had to figure everything out on my own, and it was hard, so much harder than it needed to be. So now I help other women because I can, and because it's what I wish someone had done for me. That's how we change the world, Vanessa. One woman helping another, creating ripples that spread further than we can imagine. Before Vanessa could respond, her mother appeared in the doorway, her face concerned and loving. Vanessa Marie, you get in this house right now before you catch pneumonia in that rain. Dorothy smiled. You have a good family here. Let them help you. And remember what I said. You call me. She got back in her car, and Vanessa watched her drive away. This guardian angel who had appeared out of nowhere and changed everything. Then Keisha had her arm and was pulling her toward the house, toward warmth and safety, and the kind of love that didn't come with conditions or contempt. Inside, her parents sat at the kitchen table, her father in his reading glasses with the newspaper spread out in front of him, her mother in her housecoat with tea brewing on the stove. They looked older than Vanessa remembered, more gray in their hair, more lines around their eyes. When was the last time she'd really looked at them? When was the last time she'd come home and just sat with them, without checking her phone to see if Johnson was texting, without worrying about how long she could stay before he started complaining? Baby girl, her father said, standing up to fold her into one of his signature hugs, the kind that had made everything better when she was a child. Welcome home. I'm sorry to impose, Vanessa began, but her mother cut her off with a sharp look. Don't you dare apologize for coming home when you need us. This is your house, always has been, always will be. Now sit down and tell us what happened. So she did. She sat at the kitchen table where she'd done her homework as a child, where she'd eaten thousands of meals, where she'd told her parents about her first crush and her college acceptance and the day she'd met Johnson. And she told them everything. The years of increasing isolation and criticism, the way Johnson had made her feel worthless, the humiliation at the party, Dorothy's intervention, and finally the moment she'd walked out. Her father's face had gone from concern to anger to something that looked like grief as she talked. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. I knew something was wrong, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. I saw it happening. The way you stopped coming around as much. The way you got quiet when Johnson called. The way you started apologizing for everything, even things that weren't your fault. I wanted to say something, but your mother said we had to let you figure it out, that pushing would just make you defensive. We were wrong, her mother said firmly, reaching across the table to take Vanessa's hand. We should have spoken up. We should have told you that you deserve better, that the way he treated you wasn't acceptable. We let you stay in that situation for too long because we were afraid of losing you completely. You didn't lose me, Vanessa said, squeezing her mother's hand. I lost myself for a while, but I'm finding my way back. Keisha had been quietly making tea, but now she set a steaming mug in front of Vanessa and sat down beside her. So what's the plan? Are you going to divorce him? Fight the prenup? I don't know yet, Vanessa admitted. Dorothy said there are grounds to challenge it, but that means lawyers and courts and fighting Johnson, who has a lot more money and resources than I do. Maybe it's easier to just sign whatever he wants and move on with my life. Easier doesn't mean right, her father said. That man tried to destroy your spirit, made you give up your work, isolated you from your family. You think he deserves to walk away from this without any consequences? You think you should get nothing after 5 years of marriage? What am I fighting for, though? Vanessa asked. Money? I don't want his money. I never wanted his money. I just wanted him to love me the way he used to see me the way he did when we first met. You can't get that back, her mother said gently. That person either never really existed or he's gone now. But you can fight for justice. You can fight for your own value. To prove to yourself and to him that he doesn't get to control the narrative, that he doesn't get to treat you like you're worthless and walk away clean. Vanessa sipped her tea, letting the warmth spread through her. Her mother was right. It wasn't really about the money or even about revenge. It was about reclaiming her own sense of worth, about proving to herself that she mattered, that her 5 years of marriage meant something, that she deserved to be treated with basic human dignity and respect. Okay, she said finally. I'll talk to Dorothy's lawyers. I'll see what they say about challenging the prenup. But I'm also going to call Sharon Mitchell at the Community Empowerment Center tomorrow and see if there's any chance of getting my old job back. And I'm going to meet with Richard Cardwell on Tuesday, like I promised. Whatever happens with Johnson, I need to rebuild my own life, not just tear down what he built. Her family nodded, pride evident in their faces. They sat together for another hour, drinking tea and talking about logistics, where Vanessa would sleep, her old room which her parents had kept exactly as it was, what she needed to do about her car, still parked at the penthouse building, whether she should try to get more of her things from the apartment, probably not worth a confrontation. Finally exhausted emotionally and physically, Vanessa climbed the stairs to her childhood bedroom. It was like stepping back in time. The purple walls she'd begged her parents to paint when she was 14, the bookshelf full of young adult novels and textbooks from college, the twin bed with its worn quilt that her grandmother had made. She sat down on the edge of the bed and looked around at this room that represented who she used to be, before Johnson, before the penthouse, before she'd lost herself in someone else's vision of success. Her phone buzzed, multiple texts from Johnson, each one angrier than the last. "This is ridiculous. Come home and we'll talk about this like adults. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. That woman poisoned you against me. Don't you see that? She's using you. Fine. Run home to mommy and daddy. See how long it takes before you come crawling back." Vanessa blocked his number without responding. Let him rage into the void. Let him experience what it felt like to be ignored, to have your words fall on deaf ears. She changed into an old t-shirt from a 5K run she'd done years ago and climbed into bed. The mattress was lumpy, the room was small, the house was modest and middle class, and nothing like the luxury she'd been living in for the past 3 years, and she felt more at home than she had in ages. The next morning, Vanessa woke to the smell of her father's signature Sunday breakfast: pancakes, turkey bacon, and scrambled eggs with cheese. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot everything that had happened. Then it all came rushing back, and instead of dread, she felt something that might have been hope. Downstairs, her family was already gathered around the table, but they'd added another person. A woman in her 50s with warm brown skin and kind eyes sat drinking coffee with Vanessa's mother, deep in conversation. "Vanessa," her mother said, smiling, "look who stopped by. Sharon Mitchell from the Community Empowerment Center. I gave her a call this morning, and she came right over." Sharon stood up, her expression a mixture of joy and concern. "Vanessa, it's so good to see you. I heard you might be available to talk about coming back to work with us, and I had to come immediately before you changed your mind or got snapped up by someone else." Vanessa laughed, surprised and touched. "I literally just decided last night that I was going to call you. How did my mother even know?" "I know my daughter," her mother said simply. "I know that no matter what else is happening in your life, your heart is in community service. So I called Sharon at 7 this morning and told her you might be available. Turns out she's been hoping for this for 2 years." "More than hoping," Sharon said, sitting back down and gesturing for Vanessa to join them. "Actively praying, actually. Vanessa, the center hasn't been the same since you left. We've had 3 program directors in 2 years, and none of them understood the community the way you did. Our numbers are down, our partnerships are struggling, and morale is low. We need you back." "I appreciate that, Sharon, but I don't know if I can just step back into my old role. Things are complicated right now. I'm in the process of separating from my husband. I'm staying with my parents temporarily. I don't even know where I'll be living in a few weeks. Are you sure you want to take a chance on someone whose life is kind of a mess?" "Your life isn't a mess," Sharon said firmly. "You're making brave choices and dealing with difficult circumstances. That doesn't make you unreliable or uncommitted. It makes you human. And honestly, it makes you even more valuable to our community. A lot of the women we serve are dealing with their own difficult situations, their own transitions and challenges. Having a program director who understands that from personal experience, who can relate to what they're going through, that's invaluable." Vanessa felt tears threatening again. She'd cried more in the past 12 hours than she had in the past year, like some dam inside her had finally broken, and all the emotions she'd been suppressing were flooding out. "When would you want me to start?" she asked. "How about tomorrow?" Sharon grinned. "I'm kidding, mostly. But seriously, whenever you're ready, we can start part-time if you need flexibility, full-time if you're able. The board approved a salary increase last month specifically in hopes of luring you back. It's not billionaire money, but it's a living wage with full benefits and the knowledge that you're making a real difference in people's lives." "I never wanted billionaire money," Vanessa said softly. "I just wanted to do work that mattered and be with someone who valued me. Turns out I could have one, but not the other." "Well, now you can have the work," Sharon said, "and eventually when you're ready, you'll find someone who gives you both. But that's future Vanessa's problem. Present Vanessa needs a job and a purpose, and I'm offering both." They spent the next hour discussing the details. Salary, significantly more than Vanessa had been making before, though still modest by most standards. Benefits, schedule, and the current state of the center's programs. Sharon was honest about the challenges, the funding gaps and staffing issues and community needs that seemed to grow faster than their capacity to meet them. But she was also hopeful, energized by the possibility of having Vanessa back on the team. After Sharon left, promising to email over an official offer letter by the end of the day, Vanessa's phone rang. An unknown number, which she almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Mrs. Matthews, this is Lauren Rodriguez from Chen Foundation Legal Services. Mrs. Dorothy Chen asked me to reach out to you about your situation. Do you have time to talk? Vanessa stepped out onto the small back porch, settling into the old wooden bench where she used to sit and read on summer afternoons. Yes, I have time. For the next 45 minutes, Lauren walked her through her options. The prenup wasn't as airtight as Johnson's lawyers had made it seem. There were several potential grounds for challenge. The fact that Vanessa hadn't had independent legal counsel when she signed it, that she'd been pressured to sign it just days before the wedding, that the terms were unconscionable given the length of the marriage and her contributions. But Lauren was also honest about the difficulties. Fighting a prenup is expensive and time-consuming, she explained. Your husband has significant resources and will likely hire aggressive counsel. We could be looking at a year or more of litigation, depositions, court dates. It's going to be stressful and difficult. The question you need to ask yourself is whether it's worth it to you, not just financially, but emotionally. What would I be fighting for? Vanessa asked. Realistically, if we challenge the prenup and won, what would that look like? Given the length of your marriage, your age, and the fact that you gave up your career at his request, you'd be looking at potentially several million in settlement plus spousal support while you rebuild your career. Not half of his wealth by any means, but enough to provide security and options. You'd also have leverage to negotiate things like your car, any joint property, access to your belongings that are still at the penthouse. Several $1,000,000. It was an incomprehensible amount of money to Vanessa, who had grown up watching her parents carefully budget every dollar, who had worked her way through college and grad school, who had run a nonprofit on grants and donations and sheer determination. Life-changing money. Security money. Never have to worry again money. But was it worth a year of fighting Johnson, of giving him that much more space in her life, that much more power to hurt her? Can I think about it? Vanessa asked. Of course. Mrs. Chen made clear that you should take all the time you need. This is your decision, and whatever you choose, we'll support you. If you decide to fight, we'll represent you on contingency, meaning you don't pay unless we win. If you decide to accept the prenup terms and just file for a simple divorce, we can handle that too. There's no wrong choice here, Mrs. Matthews. Only what's right for you. After hanging up, Vanessa sat on the porch for a long time, watching sparrows hop around the small backyard, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, kids playing, someone mowing their lawn, music drifting from a nearby house. This was the world she'd come from, the world she'd left behind for Johnson's penthouse and charity galas and designer gowns. And sitting here now, she couldn't remember why that had ever seemed appealing, why she'd ever thought that world was superior to this one. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Dorothy. Checking in, how are you holding up? Vanessa smiled and typed back. Better than I expected. Thank you for everything you did last night. I'm not sure I would have had the courage without you. The response came quickly. You had the courage all along. You just needed someone to remind you it was there. Proud of you, dear. Keep me posted. On Tuesday afternoon, Vanessa walked into Richard Cardwell's downtown office building wearing a simple navy suit she'd bought at a consignment store that morning. It wasn't designer, wasn't expensive, but it fit well and made her feel professional and competent. She'd pulled her hair back in a low bun, minimal makeup, small gold earrings that had been her grandmother's. She looked like herself, not like Johnson Matthews' wife, and that felt revolutionary. Richard's assistant greeted her warmly and led her to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Richard was already there, along with two other people, a younger man with sharp eyes and a tablet, and a woman about Vanessa's age with a warm smile. Vanessa, thank you for coming, Richard said, standing to shake her hand. Please sit. Can we get you anything? Coffee? Water? Water would be great, thank you. Once they were all settled, Richard made introductions. This is Marcus Chen, my Director of Community Development, and Elena Rodriguez, who heads our affordable housing initiatives. When I told them about your work at the Community Empowerment Center, they were eager to meet you. Wait, Vanessa said, looking at Marcus. Chen? Are you related to Dorothy Chen? Marcus grinned. She's my grandmother. She called me this weekend and told me in no uncertain terms that I needed to be at this meeting, that you were someone special, and we'd be fools not to work with you. Grandma Dorothy is usually right about these things. Vanessa felt a rush of warmth toward Dorothy, this woman who kept appearing in her life like a fairy godmother, making connections and opening doors. Your grandmother is an amazing person. She really is, Marcus agreed. Now tell us about your vision for integrating community services with affordable housing development. For the next 2 hours, Vanessa talked about her work, her ideas, her dreams for what could be possible if developers and community organizations truly partnered instead of just tolerating each other. She talked about the families she'd served, the barriers they faced, the creative solutions they'd developed with limited resources. She shared data, case studies, success stories, and failures they'd learned from. And they listened, really listened, asking thoughtful questions, pushing back on some ideas, building on others. It felt like the conversation she tried to have at Johnson's party, except this time no one interrupted her, no one talked down to her, no one treated her ideas like they were beneath consideration. This is exactly what we've been looking for, Elena said finally. We've been developing affordable housing for years, but we've struggled with retention and community building. People move into our developments, but they don't stay or they struggle to thrive. We've been missing this piece, the wraparound services and community connection piece that you're describing. What would it look like to formalize a partnership? Vanessa asked, her heart racing. We'd want the Community Empowerment Center embedded in our new development in Southwest Philly, Richard said. We're breaking ground in 6 months on a mixed income project, 200 units. We'd provide space for your operations rent-free, and we'd fund a significant portion of your programming through our community development budget. In exchange, you'd provide services exclusively to our residents for the first 2 years while we establish the model, then expand to the surrounding neighborhood. How significant a portion? Vanessa asked, because Sharon had taught her years ago to always ask about money directly. Richard named a figure that made Vanessa's head spin. It was more than the center's entire current annual budget. It was transformational, game-changing money that would allow them to hire more staff, expand programs, actually pay people what they were worth. That's incredibly generous, Vanessa managed. It's an investment, Richard corrected. We believe this model could be replicated in developments across the city and across the country even. But we need the right partner to prove it works, someone with your expertise and community credibility. We're not doing you a favor, Vanessa. We're asking you to help us build something that could change how affordable housing works in this country. Vanessa thought about Johnson, about how he dismissed her work as small-time and irrelevant, about how he'd made her feel like her passion for community service was something to be embarrassed about. And here were these successful, powerful people telling her that her expertise was valuable, that her vision mattered, that they wanted to invest millions in making it reality. I'd need to talk to my board, Vanessa said, trying to keep her voice professional despite the joy bubbling up inside her. Sharon Mitchell, our executive director, would need to be involved in all the planning. This is too big for me to commit to alone. Of course, Richard said, we'll set up a meeting with your full leadership team. But Vanessa, I want you to know that you're the key to this. Your vision, your community knowledge, your ability to connect with people and understand their needs, that's what makes this possible. We can provide money and buildings, but you provide the heart. Don't undersell that. Walking out of that meeting, Vanessa felt 10 feet tall. She called Sharon immediately, barely able to contain her excitement as she described the opportunity. Sharon screamed so loud that Vanessa had to hold the phone away from her ear. Are you kidding me right now? Sharon shouted. Vanessa, this is everything we've ever dreamed of. We need to call an emergency board meeting, like tomorrow. Can you come in and present this? I'll be there, Vanessa promised. She was about to head to the subway when a sleek black car pulled up beside her, and the window rolled down. Johnson sat in the back seat, his expression cold and hard. Get in, he said. We need to talk. I don't think that's a good idea, Vanessa said, her earlier joy evaporating into wariness. I'm not asking. Get in the car, Vanessa, or I swear I will make this divorce so ugly and expensive that you'll wish you'd never left. Against her better judgment, driven by old habits of compliance and fear, Vanessa got in the car. Johnson told the driver to circle the block, giving them privacy. "What do you want, Johnson?" Vanessa asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I want you to stop this nonsense," Johnson said. "You've made your point. You were upset about the party, I get it. I was harsh. Maybe I went too far. But running home to your parents, having my landlord threaten me, meeting with my business contacts behind my back, this has gone far enough." "Your business contacts?" Vanessa repeated incredulously. "Richard Cardwell asked to meet with me. I didn't seek him out." "Because you embarrassed me at the party," Johnson snapped. "Because you made yourself into this tragic figure that people feel sorry for. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? My own wife runs away and suddenly I'm the villain in some story you're telling everyone who'll listen." "I haven't told anyone anything," Vanessa said. "I haven't bad-mouthed you to anyone. I'm just trying to rebuild my life. By taking meetings with people I'm trying to build partnerships with, by working with Dorothy Chen, who clearly has some agenda against me. You're sabotaging me, Vanessa, and I won't stand for it." "Everything isn't about you," Vanessa said, surprised by her own boldness. "Richard asked to meet about community development. Dorothy helped me because she's a kind person who helps women in difficult situations. The world doesn't revolve around you and your business deals and your reputation." Johnson's hands shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to hurt. "You need to remember who you're talking to. I made you. Without me, you're nothing. A nobody from a nobody family with a nothing job helping nobodies. You walk away from me, you're walking away from the only thing that gives your pathetic little life any meaning." Vanessa looked down at his hand on her wrist, at the way his fingers were digging into her skin, leaving marks. And something inside her finally completely broke free from the fear and compliance that had kept her trapped. "Let go of me," she said quietly. "Or what?" Johnson challenged. "Or I will scream loud enough that everyone on this street hears me, and your driver will have to explain to the police why his boss was physically restraining a woman in the back of his car. Let go of me right now." Johnson released her wrist, shock flickering across his face. Vanessa had never stood up to him like this, never threatened him, never drawn a line he couldn't cross. "Stop the car," Vanessa told the driver. "I'm getting out." "We're not done talking," Johnson said. "Yes, we are. You'll hear from my lawyer about the divorce. That's the only communication we need to have from now on." She leaned forward, catching the driver's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Stop the car, please." The driver, bless him, pulled over immediately. Vanessa got out, not looking back as Johnson called after her. Her wrist throbbed where he'd grabbed her, and she knew there would be bruises. Good. Physical evidence of what he was capable of the control and violence that lurked beneath his polished surface. She took out her phone and called Lauren Rodriguez. "I've made my decision," Vanessa said when the lawyer answered. "I want to fight the prenup. I want to make Johnson face consequences for how he treated me. And I want every dollar I'm entitled to, not because I need the money, but because he needs to learn that he can't control and diminish people without paying a price." "I was hoping you'd say that," Lauren said, and Vanessa could hear the smile in her voice. "Let's make him regret underestimating you." The divorce proceedings took 11 months, and they were every bit as ugly as Johnson had promised. His lawyers were aggressive, questioning everything from Vanessa's motives to her mental health to her contributions to the marriage. They tried to paint her as a gold digger who had manipulated a successful man, despite the fact that she'd been with Johnson since before he had any gold to dig. But Vanessa had something Johnson hadn't counted on: a team of people who believed in her. Dorothy's foundation provided legal representation and emotional support. Her family showed up to every court date, a united front of love and solidarity. Sharon and the Community Empowerment Center board wrote statements about her character and professional competence. Richard Cardwell provided testimony about the value of her expertise and ideas. And slowly, painfully, the truth came out. Evidence of Johnson's controlling behavior, the forged signatures on documents, the way he'd isolated Vanessa from her support system, the financial manipulation. Lauren was relentless, building a case not just for setting aside the prenup, but for holding Johnson accountable for emotional abuse and financial coercion. In the end, the judge ruled in Vanessa's favor, setting aside the prenup as unconscionable and awarding her a settlement of $4.2 million plus ongoing spousal support for 3 years. Johnson's face when the verdict came down was something Vanessa would remember forever. Shock, rage, and disbelief that he hadn't won. That for once in his privileged life, there were actual consequences for his actions. But the money wasn't the victory that mattered most to Vanessa. The real victory came 6 months after the divorce was finalized, when she stood in the community room of Richard Cardwell's new affordable housing development, surrounded by families who had moved into their new homes and were now participating in the Community Empowerment Center's programs. There were job training classes happening in one corner, homework help for kids in another, a financial literacy workshop getting started in the main room. The walls were covered with artwork from residents, bulletin boards full of community announcements and success stories. It was everything Vanessa had dreamed of, proof that her vision worked, that communities thrived when given real support and genuine partnership. Dorothy stood beside her, surveying the scene with satisfaction. "You did it," she said simply. "You took your pain and your anger and your determination, and you built something beautiful." "We did it," Vanessa corrected. "None of this would have happened without you. You gave me the courage to leave, the resources to fight back, the connections to build something new. You changed my life, Dorothy." "You changed your own life," Dorothy said firmly. "I just opened a few doors. You're the one who walked through them. You're the one who did the hard work of rebuilding and healing and believing in yourself again. Don't give me credit for your own strength." A young woman approached them, a toddler on her hip and hope in her eyes. "Miss Matthews, I just wanted to thank you. I moved into this building 3 months ago, and I was scared, you know? Single mom, working 2 jobs, barely keeping my head above water. But the center, the programs you all offer, the childcare assistance and job counseling, it's changing everything for me. I got a better job, just got accepted to community college to finish my degree. My daughter's in the pre-K program and she loves it. You're changing lives here. I wanted you to know that." Vanessa felt tears prickling her eyes as she hugged this young woman, this single mother who reminded her so much of the family she'd worked with years ago, before Johnson, before the penthouse, before she'd lost sight of what really mattered. "You're changing your own life," Vanessa told her, echoing Dorothy's words. "We're just here to support you, but the courage, the determination, the hard work, that's all you. Be proud of yourself." After the woman walked away, Vanessa turned to Dorothy with a watery smile. "I sound like you now." "Good," Dorothy said. "The world needs more women who understand that we all have power, we all have agency, we all have the capacity to change our circumstances if we're given the right support and resources." That's what you're doing here, Vanessa. You're giving people what you needed, someone who believes in them, who sees their potential, who refuses to let them be diminished. That evening, Vanessa sat in her new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in West Philadelphia that she'd bought with part of her settlement. It wasn't a penthouse, wasn't luxurious or impressive, but it was hers, truly hers, paid for with money she'd fought for and earned. The furniture was a mix of secondhand finds and IKEA basics. The artwork was from local artists she'd met through the center. The bookshelves were full of books she'd actually read, not just impressive-looking volumes meant to signal sophistication. She made herself dinner, simple pasta with vegetables, and ate at her small kitchen table while looking over program proposals for the center's expansion. Her phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. "Family dinner Sunday? Mama's making her chicken." Vanessa smiled and typed back, "I'll be there." Another text, this one from Sharon. "Board approved your promotion to executive director. Congratulations, boss lady." And then one from Richard. "The investors loved your presentation. They want to fund 3 more developments using this model. Call me tomorrow to discuss." Vanessa set down her phone and looked around her apartment, her life, her future. She thought about Johnson, probably alone in some new penthouse with new expensive furniture and the same empty values. She thought about Dorothy, who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying. She thought about all the women who would benefit from the programs they were building, all the families who would find support and community and hope. The door buzzed and Vanessa checked her security camera to see Dorothy standing in the hallway. holding a bottle of wine and wearing a knowing smile. "I thought you might like some company to celebrate," Dorothy said when Vanessa opened the door. "And I wanted to officially welcome you to the neighborhood. Turns out my apartment is just 3 blocks from here." "Of course it is," Vanessa laughed, pulling Dorothy into a hug. "You're impossible, you know that? You've orchestrated this entire thing from the beginning." "I've done no such thing," Dorothy said innocently, though her eyes sparkled with mischief. "I simply recognized potential when I saw it and provided a few opportunities. You did everything else yourself." They sat on Vanessa's second-hand couch, drinking wine and talking about everything and nothing. Dorothy shared stories about the other women she'd helped over the years. How many of them were now successful professionals, business owners, community leaders in their own right. How some of them had become friends, had formed a network of women supporting women that stretched across Philadelphia and beyond. "You're part of that network now," Dorothy said. "Part of a community of women who know what it means to rebuild, to reclaim their power, to refuse to be diminished. And one day when you're ready, you'll help another woman the way I helped you. That's how the cycle continues. That's how we change the world." "I'm already trying," Vanessa said softly. "Every woman who comes to the center, every family we serve, I try to see them the way you saw me, as people with potential, with strength, with the capacity to change their own lives if given the right support." "Then you've already succeeded," Dorothy said. "The rest is just details." A year later, Vanessa stood on a stage at a community event, accepting an award for the Community Empowerment Center's innovative housing partnership model. Johnson was probably somewhere making billions, still convinced that money and power were the measures of success. But Vanessa knew better now. Success was the single mother who finished her degree. Success was the family that moved into safe, affordable housing with support services that helped them thrive. Success was the network of women who met monthly to share resources and encouragement. Success was waking up every morning knowing that her work mattered, that she had value beyond what any person could give or take away. As she looked out at the audience, she saw Dorothy in the third row, beaming with pride. She saw her family, her parents holding hands, Keisha with her kids, all of them glowing with joy at her success. She saw Sharon in the center's board, Richard and his team, dozens of faces of people she'd worked with and helped and learned from. And she knew with absolute certainty that leaving Johnson, as terrifying as it had been, was the best decision she'd ever made. Not because of the settlement money or the career success or even the freedom from his contempt, but because she had reclaimed herself, had remembered who she was and what she was capable of, had learned that her worth wasn't determined by someone else's opinion of her. "I want to thank everyone who supported me on this journey," Vanessa said into the microphone, her voice strong and clear. "Especially Dorothy Chen, who taught me that the most powerful thing we can do is help each other rise. That when we lift up one woman, we lift up entire communities. That there's no such thing as a self-made success story, that we all need support and encouragement and people who believe in us. So to everyone here tonight, thank you for believing. And to anyone out there who's struggling, who feels trapped or diminished or worthless, I want you to know, you have more power than you think. You deserve better than you're getting. And there are people ready to help you if you're ready to help yourself. Don't give up. Don't accept less than you deserve. And never ever let anyone convince you that you're nothing. Because you're not. You're everything. And you matter. Always." The applause was thunderous. But what Vanessa heard most clearly was Dorothy's voice in her memory from that first night in the penthouse bathroom. "You have more power than you think, child. You just have to remember how to use it." She had remembered. And in remembering, she had reclaimed not just her life, but her purpose, her joy, and her faith in the possibility of new beginnings. That, Vanessa thought, as she accepted her award and looked out at all the faces of people she loved and who loved her back, was the real happy ending. Not revenge, not money, not proving Johnson wrong. Just the quiet, powerful knowledge that she had survived, she had thrived, and she had used her experience to help others do the same. And somewhere in the city, in a building Dorothy Chen owned, in an apartment that Vanessa had once called home, Johnson Matthews sat alone with his billions and his bitterness, still unable to understand that the woman he'd tried to destroy had become something far more powerful than he could ever comprehend. She had become free.